Welcome into Jake and Joshua, where we sound off on some of the biggest topics in Big Ten football. I think it's a good time to do this one. It's November. We just had the first weekend of November games. We saw it could be a little bit spooky. Things certainly change. Weather's different right now. Rosters are a little bit beat up. And we got some teams in this conference, specifically Ohio State, Michigan. You can look over in the West, and it's a little bit more of a mixed bag, but Illinois still seems like they're in control of that. They're going to be playing really important games in the month of November. Take yourself back to the locker room to when you were a player. How did your mentality shift once the calendar turned?
I think last week is a good segue into this because, there's this intense focus that you have to have each week, even if the process does get monotonous. And all of a sudden, you can find yourself in a game that you should win, and you still prepare and you do the things necessary, but maybe that focus isn't dialed in where it needs to be to go out there and handle business the way that you need to with lofty goals at the end of the season. That, to me, comes down on your leadership in the locker room, though. If you sense that amongst your position group, your unit, or your team, to call guys up and to lead by example. It's also on coaching, too, because at this point, you're not installing new plays. You've already went over it throughout the season. You're not going to, if you're still learning things at this point, significant things, that's a problem in and of itself. Keep the process fresh so guys enjoy coming into work and they have that intense focus when it's necessary.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty big part of it. Like this is a point in the season where it is monotonous and it takes discipline and maturity to continue to do the things that you did at the beginning of the year that made you successful. And I think that's a hard process to overcome, especially when you're a younger player. And so I think that's a big part of it, is like how much can you be in your routine, but also things are starting to change as well. Mention the weather thing, like you try not to make a big deal of it, but for some guys it's a bigger deal than others. Like for a linebacker, all I got to do is get downhill and smack a dude in the face.
Yeah.
For somebody who is catching the football like yourself, like is the ball wet? Is the ball hard? Are my hands cold? Like can I actually feel them depending on what the weather is? Those are things that you have to adapt your game to. Then you start to look in terms of academics and socially. Getting toward the end of the semester, how much catch-up am I trying to play at this point to make sure that I get a good enough grade in whatever class I'm taking? Like that is the other part of what makes November football so difficult, is it seems like there are so many parts of your life that are all converging. Can you make plans for Thanksgiving depending on where you're playing the game and all those different things? So many factors late in the year, and I think the teams that have the most maturity and resolve are the ones that ultimately have the success here.
You have NIL now too, which is a completely different thing, because it's like if someone's offering you 4 or 5 figures in college, that's everything. You gotta show up and do it, but you're getting tugged in directions. I always like the analogy of, you can go all the way back to June and July summer conditioning, and you take one class in the summer traditionally, your workload's low. Everything is to get you as close, if this is your 100%, you're trying to push it to 105, 110. And then throughout the season, it's a steady decline. And you're just trying to keep it as close to the top as possible. But now you're in this point in the season where you're 85%. Like your weight room numbers, you're significantly weaker. Your body's beat up. That's exhausting in terms of just the football building. You mentioned you're being pulled in a number of different directions. This is where like mental toughness really comes in to say like, hey, no, and to have a big purpose to what you're doing. Have a good locker room culture to say like, hey, I'm going to show up and do my stuff regardless of how I feel, because I know what we're capable of. We got 2 teams right here, Ohio State and Michigan. They're deeply in the college football playoff conversation, both in the top 4. I completely agree with you that the team that can maintain their focus, the team that has the most maturity, will have the advantage down the stretch of the season.
Yeah, and you mentioned the mental toughness aspect of it. One of my old mantras is sometimes you just got to tell your brain to shut up. Like, your brain is going to tell you that you feel bad. Like, it's going to tell you probably that you feel worse than you actually feel. Physically, you can power through it. Like, everybody's body feels raggedy at this point in the year.
Yeah.
Nobody feels great. And if you feel great, then you probably didn't play hard at the beginning of the year. Like, let's just be completely honest about it. And if you let your brain continually tell you how tired you are and how sore your body is and, how your arm aches and your knee hurts, like, then it's going to hurt. But if you tell your brain to shut up, then it doesn't hurt nearly as bad. And that's a part of this process. Like, if you're a veteran guy, you've been through it before, you know how to talk to yourself internally to make sure that you can be prepared. You also know the things that you can do to enhance your treatment and your recovery, these facilities now are loaded with sports science and the doctors.
Whatever you need.
Then the nutrition aspect. You know how to fuel your body so you can recover the best.
You got some money to go get outside
yes.
treatment.
So they're in as good of a position as athletes have ever been to play great football in November. But it is a mental grind to even get here and to have important games once you do get here.
I want to bring up another point too, because practice is practice, right? And maybe people listening might not know this. You know, camp is all about physicality and building this identity. And you talk about getting calloused. Like, you intentionally bruise your body. So those hits you kind of numb your body throughout the season. As the season goes on and we get to this point, it's less about physicality. Okay, we understand we're a physical team. You got to touch it in 9-on-7 inside run drills.
Right.
Now it's about walkthroughs. But a walkthrough isn't a walkthrough. You have to be 100% mental. Your first step has to be dialed in. Your hand placement, your hat placement has to be dialed in. Your communication has to be 100%. You can't let any of that mental slow down, because that's going to affect you. From an offensive standpoint, I'm interested defensively is, again, we talked about the installation. You're installing 5 to 10 new plays, some wrinkles, some complementary plays throughout the week. Individual then comes into play. Maybe it's a double move for your receivers or tight ends off of a route that you've run throughout the year. Well, then your routes versus air, your individual, the external work with the quarterback really comes into play, because you're not going to get the same amount of full speed reps throughout the week.
Yeah, and that was basically how we did it. Like, we didn't do as much walkthrough. We were full speed to the point of contact.
Yes.
And then we would pull off a lot of times. And our coaches would have the sports science data on our load from the practice before, from the game before, how much maybe we had run, what our top speed was, the stress that was on our system, and they would actually tailor our practice rep count to the numbers. It was a really efficient way to do it. And it was also a great way to get young guys opportunities in practice to run with the 1s or the 2s if they typically didn't, because somebody's got to fill in that role. But the whole thing changes. Like, your main point is totally correct. The whole thing changes because nobody was thinking about load management in training camp. No, like, you're not doing that. You get to this point in the year and it's like, hey, our guy might have played 70 reps at linebacker in this last game. We can't have him taking every practice rep because he's not going to be recovered by the time the next game comes around. Now, I'll finish with this, to your point on the walkthroughs, just getting inside a program. I hated them. I hated them as a veteran player because the scout team did not take them seriously. Because you have to take the meeting room mentality out to the football field.
Yeah.
And you're right about your fundamentals and your first step and just understanding how it's supposed to develop. And when young guys who aren't as bought in are running somebody else's stuff and they're just kind of out there doing it, the look is never right.
Yes.
And I could not stand going out there and getting a look that did not feel like a game rep. That was a wasted rep.
Yep.
And so that's the other difficult part about it, is top to bottom, your team has to be pretty locked in and mature if you're going to say we're going to slow it down and do a walkthrough. Because it's not typically the veteran guys that you're worried about. It's the scout team guys who are first year on campus. By November, they might be a little bit disconnected because they're redshirting. They've got a lot going on in their lives because they had never been through a college football season, and they're looking at a card trying to replicate what the other team does. It's a tough spot to be in.
Intensity and physicality are separate things, and I think it's easy for a young person to think they're one and the same. At this point, it's less about physicality. You have to maintain that intensity.
Yeah.
You're right. It's easy for a young guy to say, oh, wow, I'm part of a team that's doing well. Oh, we're toning it back in practice. They might mishear the message of the head coach, and they can exhale a little bit.
Yeah.
The value of a scout team, a good coach should recognize scout team players
100%.
consistently to let them know they're being seen, they're being heard. This is your chance to move up. And then the value of your assistant coaches. Because you mentioned the cards, and for the people that are listening, a scout team sits there and there's a assistant coach that holds up a card, and you are just a number blank on that card, and it tells you exactly what to do. You still have to maintain that focus, those details, to give a look to your defense or offense, the true 1s and 2s you're going against.
Yeah, and so just to put a bow on this, it's difficult once you get to this point in the year. There are so many factors that contribute to the successes or failures that can occur in November football. There is a reason why some programs, and I'm not saying teams, I'm saying programs, because I'm talking about head coaches who have developed systems and have implemented them over time and executed them, have success at this time of the year, and why others don't. It is hard. And I'm excited to see what some of our Big Ten teams are going to do.
Absolutely.
Obviously, Ohio State, Michigan, collision course at the end of the year. The West,
Yeah.
we were joking around last week. Like, we don't know, but there are a lot of teams that have important games coming up. And it will be fun to see who rises up to the challenge.
This is where coaches, when you see a coaching salary, $7, $8, $9, $10 million, this is where it's earned right
you
here
make
in
the
November.
money here.
Exactly.
You don't make it in August and September.
Yeah.
Hey, always good.
Always great.